like to keep it. Theatre director and drama therapist and facilitator. She's a graduate of the New York University and the University of Witwatersrand. Her research looks at how race and gender intersect to frame and shape our understanding of and interaction with sorry colleagues, with the world. Um, Her work entails creating a dialogue between race and feminist theory, social justice, and theater making practice, drama therapy, and human rights. Her international plays include Between Sisters, which is what this particular chapter focuses on. Postcards, Bodily Preserves, which was in Germany, South Africa, and the US. A play called Money for Shoes, which was in Botswana, in South Africa, and Swaziland. A play called Heading Out, which was in the US and the UK. And Songs for Kwezi, which was in South Africa and United States. And as well as Disappearing Act and Black in the Box, which was in the United States and Canada. Thank you very much, Doc, and over to you.
Thank you so much, Annelile and the MISTRA team. I'd like to take a moment to really appreciate the generous organizers of this gathering, the team and the virtuosic staff of MISTRA, the director of MISTRA, Joel Nechitenze. And I'd like to also acknowledge fellow writers who are here in the meeting and the editors of the volume, Prof. Mhlambi and Sandile Ngidi. Thank you so much for creating this space and for us to have a moment of pause and celebration and reflection. As said, I am a playwright, a director, a drama therapist, and an academic. And to index my piece and to talk about my chapter in the book, I'd like to first of all to share a poem that I really use in most of my work right now because it really speaks back to the work that I've been working on. And it's the poem by Alice Walker that goes, "And they were women, then my mother's generation, husky of voice, stout of step, their fists as well as hands, how they battered down doors, ironed out starched shirts, how they led armies, head-ragged generals across mined fields, booby-trapped ditches to discover books, desks, a place for us, how they knew what we must know without knowing a page of it themselves." So I situate my work in a moment and in a space and in a history of Black women as radical subjects in history. Quoting Hartman, I'm of that wild idea that animates me, that Black women are radical subjects who tirelessly imagine other ways to live and never fail to consider how the world might be otherwise. So in this paper, I assert a political and ideological utility of domesticity or the home as both an idea and a material space that I use in performance. The home is both a space for making and a space for creating. I tell the broader story of a Black woman and her life and as an engagement to fight for a decency, for freedom, and for well-being. I invest in the body and the ways that the Black woman's body becomes a material for archiving of knowledge and production. So using the play that I created in 2016, Between Sisters, as a way of analyzing the social relational structures of how Black women's bodies mitigate access and freedom. I use the play to also interrogate how Black feminist aesthetic interrogates domestic ideologies and how this becomes this Black spatial project of the home as a space with freedom and labor and concepts of reproduction, creative labor, and self-definition can happen. So we created characters, two sisters who then engage with their Black madam. And in this play, these women engage with different performances of what does it mean to become a Black madam in the new day South Africa. And through this, they engage and think about what are the indicators of Blackness, how are the indicators of how we think of a domestic worker. And normally in South Africa, we know it's this ghostly figure that exists in our homes and that kind of haunts our own existence of what does it mean to be South African in this current situation. What these women do in that play out, they think about, and we use the home as a portal into thinking about what is language, what is these cultural markers that mark us as women in the home, and how do we then imagine ourselves out of this home. So the two sisters sit and engage and talk about what does it mean to be themselves, but they also imagine worlds beyond the home. They use the interior decoration, the concept of set design, the concept of gesture, and sartorial use of their clothing and their interior lives to explain how they might navigate the world and what their choices they're making in terms of exposing precarity, racial oppression, and class positionality. And through a couple of discussions, I link and draw on the Black women experience in the home and how they engage with each other to also to think about a broader concept of theater aesthetic in South Africa. I discuss a historical formation of how we think about Black aesthetic in South Africa, and thinking through the idea that in South Africa, there are those two parallel existence of a Black aesthetic. So there's the one that is what Black consciousness movements scholars talk about, that it is the Black theater, which is theater made by Black people, and then there's Black theater made with Black people. So in that way, I divide and conquer and kind of think about what is that structure and how does it then entail in the way that we then create gestures. How do we create in terms of what do we look at when we're thinking of an aesthetic way of reading? I discuss how through these women's experiences of shame, complexity, and the domestic labors and pains that they experience at work and in their workspaces, we can reimagine what a radical subject is. We know in Marx, the radical subject is the worker. We know in Black consciousness, the radical subject is the Black male. But here in Black feminist aesthetic, I am rooting it in the philosophy that in thin beauty, there must be a way of being human. And therefore, the Black radical subject is this, that takes center stage is a Black female, where Black women are the main central characters in their interior lives, their interior spaces, their homes, their way they think about themselves, the story they tell each other and themselves drive the storyline. And finally, the play is not just linear. It's not about just time and space, but it's about how we correlate the linearity of time and space and make and recreate worlds that are able to impact on the world outside. We look at the roles of both madam and maids in extensive ways and as clear markers of oppression, markers of invisibility, markers of silence and hidden. And I argue that that there's a need for a Black definition of a Black feminist aesthetic that allows for we women to use their own stories and bodies as a discursive space and a material to examine the possibilities for creating interventions, strategies, and interruptions of what is obstructing out there. What are the gaps, the pauses, the logistical counterparts that are happening in the world? And how can we contest the enclosures that we struggle with in the art space? I think about creative labor also, and think about how the invisibility of the domestic worker also highlights and speaks and kind of like haunts us as Black women within the art space, as our work sometimes has become ghostly and quiet, and that our work our work has been the way that we've been situated in the back foot. So I make a claim that there is a gesture and there is a way of creating that communicates, that comes from our own work, that is maybe silences, that may be groans, that may be song. In the way of closing, I'm not sure if I have, but in my way of closing, I want to suggest, which is not in this chapter, but it's something that I'm thinking through and working through. And because of what this process of writing this paper brought to my own life, the idea of policy and changing positions and locations, and what does that need? What can one really imagine about policy? And how do I then locate my own work within a policy framework? And I want to use the idea of home as a measure of policy, and thinking of home using Isoke's words. And she says, home, the kitchen, is a place where we hatch strategies for our next uprising. The kitchen, the place where we speak freely and practice caring for one another. I want to think through with Angela Davis when she says home, as in the slave quarters, were Black women's spaces of private space, of rehearsal and resistance, where Hooks thinks of home as not as paradise, but a place where paradise can be created, a location of possibility, an opportunity to labor for freedom, to collectively imagine ways to move beyond our boundaries. So therefore, home becomes not just the narrowing, limiting space where Black women can be just held at home, but becomes a space and a place where innovative Black artistry can exist and can influence how we think about the world and our country, where we can rethink aesthetic not only as a historical and a critical thing, but also as a measure of knowing and what the world might be and that we may create. The play does not prescribe. At most, it leaves questions on what it means to be a Black female worker and a Black employer. It reveals the exploitative nature of our relations, but also how unpaid labor of women is always left at the back end. As a Black woman theater director, the theme of Black women as radical, complex characters is important for me. It is a currency that uncovers unique positionality, and it also allows for the tensions and contradictions and highlights gender politics, Black female labor, and the struggle for creativity. Thank you so much for the opportunity.
Wow, wow, wow. Thank you so much, Refiloe. That was absolutely